Hey, Squirrel Squad. It's time for Joe's Boys. Let's see what Joe and the boys are up to. I hope it comes up real quick. I don't lose anything. Keep an eye on them and let me know when they enter the avenue. It will take but a minute to tidy up and run down, answered Mrs. Joe, scribbling away for dear life because cereals wait for no man, not even the whole Christian Union en masse. Go up. Okay. There are more than 2 or 3. I see half a dozen at least, called Sister Ann from the hall door. No, a dozen, I do believe, Auntie. Look out, they're all coming. What shall we do? And Josie quailed at the idea of facing the black throng rapidly approaching. Mercy on us, there are hundreds. Run and put a tub in the back entry for their umbrellas to drip into. Tell them to go down the hall and leave them and pile their hats on the table. The tree won't hold them all. No use to get mats, my poor carpets. And down went Mrs. Joe to prepare for the invasion, while Josie and the maids flew about dismayed at the prospect of so many muddy boots. On they came, a long line of umbrellas with splashed legs and flushed faces underneath, for the gentlemen had been having a good time all over the town, undisturbed by the rain. Professor Bear met them at the gate and was making a little speech of welcome when Mrs. Joe, touched by their bedraggled state, appeared at the door, beckoning them in. Leaving their host to orate bareheaded in the wet, the young men hastened up the steps, merry, warm, and eager, clutching off their hats as they came and struggling with their umbrellas as the order was passed to march in and stack arms. Tramp, tramp, tramp. Down the hall went 75 pairs of boots. Soon 75 umbrellas dripped sociably in the hospitable tub, while their owners swarmed all over the lower part of the house, and 75 hearty hands were shaken by the hostess without a murmur, though some were wet, some very warm, and nearly all bore trophies of the day's ramble. One impetuous party flourished a small turtle as he had made his compliments. Another had a load of sticks cut from noted spots, and all begged for some memento of Plumfield. A pile of cards mysteriously appeared on the table with a written request for autographs, and despite her morning vow, Mrs. Joe wrote everyone while her husband and boys did the honors of the house. Josie fled to the back parlor, but was discovered by exploring youths and mortally insulted by one of them, who innocently inquired if she was Mrs. Bear. The reception did not last long, and the end was better than the beginning, for the rain ceased, and a rainbow shone beautifully over them as the good fellows stood upon the lawn, singing sweetly for a farewell, a happy omen. That bow of promise arched over the young heads, as if heaven smiled at the rainbow, as if heaven smiled upon their union and showed them that above the muddy earth and rainy skies the blessed sun still shone for all. 3 cheers, and then away they went, leaving a pleasant recollection of their visit to amuse the family, as they scraped the mud off the carpets with shovels and emptied the tub half full of water. Nice, honest, hard-working fellows, and I don't begrudge my half hour at all. But I must finish, so don't let anyone disturb me till tea time, said Mrs. Joe, leaving Mary to shut up the house, for Papa and the boys had gone off with the guests, and Josie had run home to tell her mother about the fun at Aunt Joe's. Peace reigned for an hour, then the bell rang, and Mary came giggling up to say, "A queer kind of lady wants to know if she can catch a grasshopper in the garden." "Oh, what?" cried Mrs. Joe, dropping her pen with a blot, for of all the odd requests ever made, this was the oddest. "A grasshopper, ma'am? I said you was busy and asked what she wanted, and says she, 'I've got grasshoppers from the grounds of several famous folks, and I want one from Plumfield to add to my collection.' Did you ever?" And Mary giggled again at the idea. Tell her to take all there are and welcome. I shall be glad to get rid of them, always bouncing in my face and getting in my dress," laughed Mrs. Joe. Mary retired to return in a moment, nearly speechless with merriment. "She's much obliged, ma'am, and she'd like an old gown or a pair of stockings of yours to put in a rug she's making. Got a vest of Emerson's," she says, "and a pair of Mr. Homer's trousers and a dress of Mrs. Stowe's. She must be crazy. Give her that old red shawl, then I shall make a gay show among the great ones in that astonishing rug. Yes, they're all lunatics, these line hunters. But this seems to be a harmless maniac, for she doesn't take my time and gives me a good laugh," said Mrs. Joe, returning to her work. After a glance from the window, which showed her tall, thin lady in rusty black skipping wildly to and fro on the lawn in pursuit of the lively insect she wanted. No more interruptions till the light began to fade, and then Mary popped her head in to say, "A gentleman wished to see Mrs. Bear, and wouldn't take no for an answer." "He must. I shall not go down. This has been an awful day, and I won't be disturbed again," replied the harassed authoress, pausing in the midst of the grand finale of her chapter. "I told him so, ma'am, but he walked right in as bold as brass. I guess he's another crazy one, and I declare I'm most afraid of him. He's so big and black and cool as cucumbers, though I will say he's good looking," added Mary, with a simper, for the stranger had evidently found favor in her sight despite his boldness. "My day has been ruined, and I will have this last half hour to finish. Tell him to go away. I won't go down," cried Mrs. Joe fiercely. Mary went, and listening, in spite of herself, her mistress heard first a murmur of voices and then a cry from Mary, and remembering the ways of reporters also that her maid was both pretty and timid, Mrs. Bear flung down her pen and went to the rescue. Descending with her most majestic air, she demanded in an awe-inspiring voice, as she paused to survey the somewhat brigandish intruder who seemed to be storming the staircase which Mary was gallantly defending, "Who is this person who insists on remaining when I have declined to see him?" "I'm sure I don't know, ma'am. He won't give no name and says you'll be sorry if you don't see him," answered Mary, retiring, flushed and indignant, from her post. "Won't you be sorry?" asked the stranger, looking up with a pair of black eyes full of laughter, the flash of white teeth through a long beard, and both hands out as he boldly approached the irate lady. Mrs. Joe gave one keen look, for the voice was familiar, then completed Mary's bewilderment by throwing both arms round the brigand's neck, exclaiming joyfully, "My dearest boy, where did you come from?" "California, on purpose to see you, Mother Bear. Now won't you be sorry if I go away?" answered Dan with a hearty kiss. "To think of my ordering you out of the house when I've been longing to see you for a year," laughed Mrs. Joe, and she went down to have a good talk with her returned wanderer, who enjoyed the joke immensely. And that's the end of chapter 3, but I will go on. Chapter 4 is entitled Dan. Mrs. Joe often thought that Dan had Indian blood in him, not only because of his love of a wild, wandering life, but his appearance. For as he grew up, this became more striking. At 25, he was very tall, with sinewy limbs, a keen, dark face, and the alert look of one whose senses were all alive, rough in manner, full of energy, quick with word and blow, eyes full of the old fire, always watchful as if used to keep guard, and a general air of vigor and freshness, very charming to those who knew the dangers and delights of his adventurous life. He was looking his best as he sat talking with Mother Bear, one strong brown hand in hers and a world of affection in his voice as he said, "Forget old friends? How could I forget the only home I ever knew? Why, I was in such a hurry to come and tell my good luck that I didn't stop to fix up, you see. Though I know you'd think I look more like a wild buffalo than ever, with a shake of his shaggy black head, a tug at his beard, and a laugh that made the room ring. I like it. I always had a fancy for banditti, and you look just like one. Mary, being a newcomer, was frightened at your looks and manners. Josie won't know you, but Ted will recognize his Danny. In spite of the big beard and flowing mane, they will all be here soon to welcome you. So, before they come, tell me more about yourself. Why, Dan dear, it's nearly 2 years since you were here. Has it gone well with you? Asked Mrs. Joe, who had been listening with maternal interest to his account of life in California and the unexpected success of a small investment he had made. First rate. I don't care for the money, you know. I only want a trifle to pay my way, rather earn as I go and not be bothered with the care of a lot. It's the fun of the thing coming to me and my being able to give away. That would be great. And that I like. No use to lay up. I shan't live to be old and need it. My sort never do, said Dan, looking as if his little fortune rather oppressed him. But if you marry and settle somewhere, as I hope you will, you must have something to begin with, my son, so be prudent. And invest your money. Don't give it away. For rainy days come to all of us, and dependence would be very hard for you to bear, answered Mrs. Joe with a sage air, though she liked to see that the money-making fever had not seized her lucky boy yet. Dan shook his head and glanced about the room as if he already found it rather confined and longed for all out of doors again. Who would marry a jack-o'-lantern like me? Women like a steady-going man. I shall never be that. My dear boy, when I was a girl, I liked just such adventurous fellows as you are. Anything fresh and daring, free and romantic, is always attractive to us women folk. Don't be discouraged. You'll find an anchor some day and be content to take shorter voyages and bring home a good cargo. What shall you say if I brought you an Indian squaw some day? Asked Dan, with a glimmer of mischief in the eyes that rested on a marble bust of Galatea gleaming white and lovely in the corner. Welcome her heartily. If she was a good one, is there a prospect of it? And Mrs. Joe peered at him with the interest which even literary ladies take in love affairs. Not at present, thank you. I'm too busy to gallivant, as Ted calls it. How is the boy? Asked Dan, skillfully turning the conversation as if he had had enough of sentiment. Mrs. Joe was off at once and expatiated upon the talents and virtues of her sons till they came bursting in and fell upon Dan like two affectionate young bears, finding a vent for their joyful emotions in a sort of friendly wrestling match in which both got worsted, of course, for the hunter soon settled them. The professor followed, and tongues went like mill clappers, while Mary lighted up, and cook devoted herself to an unusually good supper, instinctively divining that this guest was a welcome one. After tea, Dan was walking up and down the long rooms as he talked, with occasional trips into the hall for a fresher breath of air. His lungs seemed to need more than those of civilized people. In one of these trips, he saw a white figure framed in the dark doorway and paused to look at it. Bess paused also, not recognizing her old friend, and quite unconscious of the pretty picture she made standing tall and slender against the soft gloom of the summer night, with her golden hair like a halo round her head, and the ends of a white shawl blown out like wings by the cool wind sweeping through the hail. Is it Dan? She asked, coming in with a gracious smile and outstretched hand. Looks like it, but I didn't know you, Princess. I thought it was a spirit, answered Dan, looking down at her with a curious softness and wonder in his face. "I've grown very much, but 2 years have changed you entirely." And Bess looked up with girlish pleasure at the picturesque figure before her, for it was a decided contrast to the well-dressed people about her. Before they could say more, Josie rushed in, and forgetful of the newly acquired dignity of her teens, let Dan catch her up and kiss her like a child. Not till he set her down did he discover she also was changed, and exclaimed in comic dismay, "Hello, why, you're growing up too. What am I going to do with no young lady to play with? Here's Ted, going it like a beanstalk, and Bess a young lady, and even you, my mustard seed, letting down your frocks and putting on airs." The girls laughed, and Josie blushed as she stared at the tall man, conscious that she had leaped before she looked. They made a pretty contrast, these two young cousins, one as fair as a lily and the other a wild rose. A little wild rose, and Dan gave a nod of satisfaction as he surveyed them, for he had seen many bonny girls in his travels and was glad that these old friends were blooming so beautifully. "Here, we can't allow any monopoly of Dan," called Mrs. Joe. "Bring him back and keep an eye on him, or he'll be slipping off for another little run of a year or two before we have half seen him." Led by these agreeable captors, Dan returned to the parlor to receive a scolding from Josie for getting ahead of all the other boys and looking like a man first. "Emil is older, but he's only a boy and dances jigs and sings sailor songs just as he used to. You look about 30 and as big and black as a villain in a play. Oh, I've got a splendid idea. You're just the thing for Arbaces in the last days of Pompeii," and I probably screwed that up. "We want to act it. Have the lion and the gladiators and the eruption. Tom and Ted are going to shower bushels of ashes down and roll barrels of stones about. We wanted a dark man for the Egyptian, and you will be gorgeous in red and white shawls, won't he, Aunt Joe?" This deluge of words made Dan clap his hands over his ears, and before Mrs. Bear could answer her impetuous niece, the Lawrences, with Meg and her family, arrived, soon followed by Tom and Nan, and all sat down to listen to Dan's adventures, told in brief yet effective manner, as the varying expressions of interest, wonder, merriment, and suspense painted on the circle of faces round him plainly showed. The boys all wanted to start at once for California and make fortunes. The girls could hardly wait for the curious and pretty things he had picked up for them in his travels, while the elders rejoiced heartily over the energy and good prospects of their wild boy. "Of course you will want to go back for another stroke of luck, and I hope you will have it. But speculation is a dangerous game, and you may lose all you've won," said Mr. Lorry, who had enjoyed the stirring tale as much as any of the boys, and who would have liked to rough it with Dan as well as they. "I've had enough of that, of it, for a while at least, too much like gambling. The excitement is all I care for, and it isn't good for me. I have a notion to try farming out west. It's grand on a large scale, and I feel as if steady work would be rather jolly after loafing round so long. I can make a beginning, and you can send me your black sheep to stock my place with. I tried sheep farming in Australia, and I know something about black ones anyway." A laugh chased away the sober look in Dan's face as he ended, and those who knew him best guessed that he had learned a lesson there in San Francisco and dared not to try again. "That's a capital idea, Dan," cried Mrs. Joe, seeing great hope in his desire to fix himself up somewhere and help others. "We shall know where you are and can go and see you and not have half the world between us. I'll send my Ted for a visit. He's such a restless spirit, it would do him good. With you, he would be safe while he worked off his surplus energies and learned a whole new business. I'll use the stubble and the hoe like a good one if I get a chance out there. But the Speranza mines sound rather jollier, said Ted, examining the samples of ore Dan had brought for the professor. You go and start a new town, and when we're ready to swarm, we will come out and settle there. We want a newspaper very soon, and I like the idea of running one myself. Much better than grinding away as I do now, observed Demi, panting to distinguish himself in the journalistic line. We could easily plant a new college there. These sturdy Westerners are hungry for learning and very quick to see and choose the best, added ever young Mr. March, beholding with his prophetic eye many duplicates of their own flourishing establishments springing up in the Wild West. Go, go, Dan, it's a fine plan, and we will back you up. I shouldn't mind investing in a few prairies and cowboys myself, said Mr. Lorry, always ready to help the lads to help themselves, both by his cheery words and ever open purse. A little money sort of ballast a fellow, and inventing it in land anchors him for a while, at least. I'd like to see what I can do, but I thought I'd consult you before I decided. Have my doubts about it suiting me for many years, but I can cut loose when I'm tired, answered Dan, both touched and pleased at the eager interest of these friends in his plans. I know you won't like it. After having the whole world to roam over, one farm will seem dreadfully small and stupid, said Josie, who much preferred the romance of the wandering life which brought her thrilling tales and pretty things at each return. And I think I will stop right there. Okay, I hope you all have a wonderful New Year's Day. And we're going to be making greens and beans. All the black-eyed peas we waited till the last minute, like yesterday. So we're taking stuff over to my brother since he can't make it up the steps to my place. The girls and I. Hannah hasn't made it back yet from her sleeping in, I'm sure, from her partying last night. She's probably up and stirring at her house, but she hadn't made it back here yet. And all the other girls have gone to visit the cousin that I saw Thanksgiving and Christmas, Aunt Brenda's great grandbaby. I had to think a minute. So I have a little bit of quiet time, and I thought I'd just read while I had the time. So have a great day. Thank you so much. I too wanted to thank you, and I will do this on the live today too. That's another thing I squirreled about cooking. So we're doing the greens, the beans of all sorts, but not black eyes, and cornbread. No meat, just veggies and cornbread over at my brother's. But I guess we'll do it later on. I'm hoping everybody will eat their lunch later, have a snack or something, so we can wait and do it after our live at 5 today as usual, and with the manager. Okay, be sweet, don't be ugly. I know you won't. Love to you all.